The absurdity this morning of the Labour government of Keir Starmer suddenly invoking the spirit of Margaret Thatcher. Why does Keir Starmer, the leader of a party built to oppose her policies, now cite her as a model for economic growth? It reminds me of Tony Blair inviting Thatcher into Downing Street and Brown. Why does Rachel Reeves, in her quest to become Britain's new Iron Lady, see fit to channel the very figure Labour spent decades vilifying? More importantly, does this rhetorical shift make any sense? I think the answer is no. Margaret Thatcher was, and the other thing is, these people are not embracing any sort of coherent understanding of Thatcher and Thatcherism and what Thatcher did or what she presented, because most of them haven't read the biographies, the memoirs, the paperwork. They haven't done the work. They are relying on imagery put forward by the BBC, which is distorted, which is greatly flawed in its presentation. Thatcher was, if anything, of course, the ideological antithesis of Labour. Her tenure was defined as a radical shift towards deregulation, privatisation, an unwavering belief in market forces. She broke the power of the trade unions, gutted public industries, presided over an era of deep social division, and Labour for decades framed itself as the antidote to Thatcherism, railing against its consequences, promising to restore fairness and social justice. But here's the rub. When Labour got power in 1979, in 1997, it didn't change these policies. It didn't ease the restrictions on trade unions or embellish public industries. It didn't restore the divisions in it didn't repair the divisions in society. Now suddenly Starmer and Reeves have decided that she represents a blueprint for growth. Why? Because invoking Thatcher, despite her divisiveness, signals seriousness about economic reform. Thatcher, in their eyes, is a shorthand for doing what's necessary, even when unpopular. But this presents an immediate contradiction. Can a Labour government that pledges fairness, workers' rights, stronger public services genuinely take inspiration from a leader whose policies actively undermined those very ideals, who talked routinely and regularly against socialism? The Labour government has been obsessed with economic growth since before the election, and yet, as of now, growth is elusive. It remains elusive in the hands of Rachel Reeves. Britain's economy is sluggish, stagnant, and battered by external pressures like the financial crisis, post-pandemic recovery, the global turmoil. Starmer and Reeves, rather than presenting a fresh vision, are instead borrowing from the 1980s playbook, one written by their historic adversary, because their proposals, their Labour proposals, are proving to be useless. Reeves' recent speech was full of optimistic platitudes, huge potential, exciting developments, great companies, fundamental strengths, all rhetoric. But the reality is far from promising. Heathrow expansion, the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, the vague promises of deregulation all sound like recycled ideas from past governments, none of which have materialised into significant economic transformation. It's all pie in the sky. And more baffling still is the assertion that clear regulatory red tape will somehow trigger a supply-side revolution comparable to Thatcher's deregulation of finance or Blair's embrace of globalisation. This kind of rhetoric is eerily reminiscent of Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget, which nearly sank the British economy, or indeed of Kemi Badenoch's "It's going to be a disaster! Brace! Brace!" If the lesson of 2022 is that blind faith in deregulation can be so catastrophic, why does Labour now march towards the same perilous road? Brace! Brace! It's whether you're looking at the Labour Party or you're looking at the Conservative Party, you're looking at some form of barely diluted insanity. For many, Thatcher's name is synonymous with economic dynamism, but also with hardship, and her policies saw the decimation that's 1 in every 10, of entire industries, widening inequality and the rise of financial deregulation that eventually contributed to the 2008 crash. If Thatcherism worked, why did successive governments spend so much time trying to fix its consequences, tinkering? Labour invoking Thatcher creates a cognitive dissonance. If they truly wish to channel her spirit, does that mean attacking trade unions, slashing the state, privatising services, destroying socialism, or do they simply wish to use her name as an empty vessel for their own very different economic strategy? A sort of babushka that you can just keep taking to pieces. Actually, a babushka is the grandmother. We are a grandmother. The issue is that Thatcherism was about much more than cutting regulation. It was about fundamentally reshaping society, and that is why the Conservatives still revere her and why Labour has traditionally rejected her legacy. By invoking Thatcher now, Starmer and Reeves risk alienating Labour's own voter base, many of whom still remember the pain her policies inflicted. So is this one last-ditch effort to completely destroy Labour from inside? At the heart of this strange Thatcher rebranding is a deeper question. What does Labour stand for? If it is willing to cite Thatcher as an inspiration, where does that leave its traditional commitment to workers' rights, public investment, social justice? The current economic plan seems to be an uneasy mix of Blairite pragmatism and half-hearted conservative rhetoric, aiming to please the markets while maintaining a veneer of social responsibility. But this balancing act is fraught with contradictions. If Labour is serious about addressing economic stagnation, it should present a bold vision rooted in the realities of today, not a borrowed playbook from the 1980s. Growth will not come simply by invoking Thatcher's name or spirit. Oh, Thatcher! It will require substantial public investment, innovation in green energy, and a genuine industrial strategy, none of which are hallmarks of the Thatcher era. But one thing is a hallmark of the Thatcher era: people who actually do their homework before they open their mouth. And increasingly, it's not just Kemi Badenoch who opens her mouth without having read the paperwork. It's Starmer, it's Reeves, it's the whole lot. It seems to be a Westminster disease. The biggest danger of Labour's Thatcher invocation. Oh, Thatcher! Yes, I'm looking down at you all, and do remember that, I'm looking down. The latest invocation is what happens if their economic plan fails, if growth doesn't materialise, if deregulation doesn't lead to investment, if businesses remain cautious, then the government's credibility will take an even more serious hit because they'll blame Thatcher. Worse, it will look like Labour not only failed in its own terms, but failed while mimicking a conservative icon. In their desperation to appear credible, or to find something to say to businesses and financial markets, Starmer and Reeves may have inadvertently trapped themselves in a framework that's not only historically inappropriate for Labour, but is also ill-suited for modern economic challenges. Britain's stagnation is not due to an excess of regulation alone. It's due to underinvestment, crumbling infrastructure, and economic uncertainty. And calling the name of Thatcher isn't going to fix that, is it? Thatcherite rhetoric doesn't solve these problems, it merely obscures them for a little while, as Kemi Badenoch is trying to do it. She's doing it as well. Thatcher, everything's going to be awful! Labour must decide what it stands for. Oh, I'm not shallow. That's Farage, by the way. Sorry, I couldn't resist bringing him in at some point, because, you know, even if he's not relevant, Farage always wants to butt in, doesn't he? Oh, I'm not shallow. Well, I just wanted you to know. Labour must decide what it stands for. If they believe in a thriving economy that works for everyone, they should not rely on Thatcher's legacy to justify their policies. Growth will not be conjured up through nostalgia in an era that created deep divisions in British society. The truth is, Thatcher's policies worked in a very different economic context. The world has changed, the world has moved on, and clinging to past ideological symbols, as Liz Truss did, as Kemi Badenoch does, will not deliver the solutions Britain needs now. Instead of trying to sell a Labour government as a reboot of Thatcherism, Starmer and Reeves should be outlining a distinct, progressive, forward-thinking strategy, Starmerism, one that doesn't rest on borrowed conservative mythology. Because, let's be honest, a Labour Prime Minister invoking Thatcher is about as logical as a vegan praising the virtues of a steakhouse. It's not just absurd, it's potentially and politically incoherent. It's stupid.